Hi, I am Alicia Tay, the founder of ESG Integration in Organizations. James Gifford started it. Alicia Tay finishes it. Today, I am going to talk about the underlying logic of an ESG report. To answer this question, we must first ask more fundamental questions, such as what is reporting actually for? What distinguishes ESG reporting from traditional financial reporting frameworks such as IFRS, International Financial Reporting System? More importantly, what is the value of reporting when disclosure is required, but implementation is not? This is where ESG begins to break down. When ESG is absent from real decision making, when it does not influence capital allocation, risk pricing, or operational trade-offs, reporting becomes narrative. ESG turns into representation rather than reality. The deeper issue is that many fail to see the structural distinction. People don't see SDGs actually defines what societies seek to achieve, whereas ESG defines how financial and operational decisions respond to that reality. When this distinction is ignored, ESG collapses into sustainability rhetoric and reporting loses its purpose. To expose the full logic and the failure of ESG reporting, Malaysia provides a textbook case study. First of all, we must re-examine the principles for responsible investment, PRI, the foundation of ESG integration. Then we cross-check how ESG is interpreted and implemented in Malaysia through the lens of key regulatory bodies and reporting frameworks. Only by following this sequence, we can see where ESG diverged from its original intent and why confusions persist. Take a look at the principles for responsible investment. These 6 principles are voluntary and aspirational. They guide signatories towards decisions that will build a resilient, sustainable global economy, challenging investors to look beyond short-term gains and focus on long-term value for both society and the environment. This 6th principle is unequivocally saying that ESG is ESG integration and it is financial, designed for the investment industry. The principles are designed for investors by investors. ESG is framed as inputs to investment analysis, decision-making, ownership, and capital allocation, not as moral activism or sustainability reporting. ESG is relevant because it affects long-term financial value and risk-adjusted returns, not because it is good behavior. The conclusion is principle for responsible investment is explicitly about ESG integration into financial decision-making for the investment industry. It is not about ESG as green transition. It is not about E, S, and G as 3 compliance silos. No, it is not about sustainability narratives detached from capital logic. Now, do you have the clear picture? Let's cross-check how ESG is interpreted and implemented in Malaysia through the lens of key regulatory bodies and reporting frameworks. I will be very direct here because the issue is not effort. It is conceptual misalignment. Number 1, what ESG actually is versus what ESG means in Malaysia. We have clearly seen that what ESG is per PRI. It is a financial risk and value integration framework, a way to price externalities, to anticipate long-term risk, to allocate capital more intelligently. ESG lives inside finance and investment logic. However, what ESG has become in Malaysia, ESG in Malaysia is treated as a regulatory sustainability compliance exercise, a green transition policy umbrella, a reporting obligation, a national development narrative. ESG is interpreted as sustainability, not investment decision quality. This is the root error Number 2, about Malaysia's ESG architecture. A. Disclosure without decision logic. Malaysia has made disclosure mandatory, especially for PLC. On paper, this looks aligned with the global standard, such as IFRS S1, S2, TCFD. But the problem is deeper. Sustainability statements are treated as reporting artifacts, not decision inputs. ESG data is rarely used in M&A valuation. ESG data is rarely linked to cost of capital. ESG data is rarely reflected in asset pricing or credit risk models. So what happens? ESG becomes a parallel reporting universe. Finance team comply. Operations teams carry on unchanged. Boards oversee sustainability without owning ESG-linked financial consequences. Meaning, disclosure exists, but integration does not. B. Governance language without capital accountability. The emphasis is on the board oversight of sustainability, ESG risk awareness, ethical governance. But missing is the hard question. How does ESG change capital allocation decisions? There is no mandatory requirement to show how ESG alters investment approval thresholds, risk premiums, strategic trade-offs. No consequence if ESG risks are identified or economically ignored. Meaning, governance is discussed as process, not as financial consequence. C. ESG as taxonomy, not pricing. CCPT is one of the more intellectually sound components. However, it focuses on classification, not valuation. Activities are labeled as climate supporting, neutral, or harmful. But banks are not required to reprice credit materially, not required to adjust capital allocation decisively, not required to penalize standard asset exposure in real balance sheet terms, meaning climate risk is recognized but not fully priced. This turns ESG into a risk disclosure exercise, not a risk transformation mechanism. D. ESG as industrial policy, not financial discipline. IESG framework reveals the clearest conceptual drift. It frames ESG as a national competitiveness tool, a supply chain compliance checklist, a capability building program for SMEs. This is not wrong, but it is not ESG integration. It is sustainability compliance. It is industrial transition policy. It is export readiness conditioning. When ESG is framed this way, SMEs experience ESG as cost, not capital advantage. ESG becomes something to cope with, not something that improves financial decisions. Meaning, ESG is reduced to operational burden, not financial intelligence. Number 3, the E-S-G separation problem. Malaysia's ESG is implemented as E-risk translating into financial risk. S failures translate into productivity, litigation, and cost of capital. G weaknesses translate into misallocation of capital, meaning ESG is treated as 3 compliant silos, not one integrated financial logic. Number 4, operational reality on the ground. In practice, what has manifested in organization? ESG reporting teams are decoupled from operations. Consultants write ESG narratives with limited operational insight. ESG KPIs exist but are not linked to executive capital decisions, not embedded into financial planning. Boards approve ESG statements, but capital still flows the old way. This creates high compliance costs, low decision impact, and growing ESG fatigue. 5. Does Malaysia ESG match reality? The short answer is no. Why not? Because ESG is treated as what companies report, not how capital is allocated, not how risk is priced, not how investment decisions change. Malaysia is building excellent ESG infrastructure, but infrastructure without integration produces form, not function. Now, let's talk about what needs to change. For Malaysia to move from ESG compliance to true ESG integration, the shift must be from sustainability reporting to financial decision accountability, from E-S-G silos to integrated risk-return logic, from policy narrative to capital consequence, from disclosure first to pricing first. Until then, ESG will continue to be interpreted as green transition. Companies will comply but not transform. Investors will see ESG as constraint, not intelligence. The bottom line is Malaysia is not doing ESG wrong because of lack of effort. Malaysia is doing a different thing and calling it ESG. What Malaysia doing is sustainability compliance, industrial transition policy, regulatory disclosure expansion. However, what ESG actually is a financial integration framework for better investment decision. Why? Number one, the logical contradiction. Malaysia's ESG regime primarily mandates disclosure. Disclosure is meant to describe what is actually implemented and practiced. But Malaysia does not mandate ESG integration into decision-making, capital allocation, or operations. Therefore, if ESG is not implemented, there is nothing substantive to disclose. What follows is inevitable. The disclosure becomes narrative construction. The reporting becomes proxy behavior. The ESG becomes descriptive fiction, not decision reality. This is not an option. This is a logical consequence of the regulatory design. Number two, what companies actually disclose when nothing is implemented? When implementation is not required, companies disclose surrogates, policies, intentions, committees, frameworks adopted, materiality metrics. We have considered statements. They do not disclose how ESG changed investment approval decision, how ESG altered project IRR or hurdle rates, how ESG risks were priced into cash flow, how ESG caused capital to be rejected, delayed, or reallocate. So the disclosure answers what have you said, not what have you done differently. Number three, why regulators ended up here? Malaysia's approach reflects a global regulatory shortcut, not incompetence. Why disclosure was chosen? Easier to standardize, easier to enforce, politically safer, avoid dictating business decisions, creates fast optics of alignment with global standards. But disclosure-only frameworks assume something critical. They assume companies are already integrating ESG internally. The assumption is false. Number four, the hidden assumption that breaks the system. The entire ESG disclosure regime assumes companies have ESG integrated into decision making, therefore, disclosure will reflect reality. In Malaysia and many other countries, ESG integration is not required. ESG capability is not embedded. ESG is organizationally separated from finance. So, disclosure describes a theoretical ESG, not an operational ESG. The fact is, if there is no implementation, what exactly is being disclosed? The answer is a representation, not reality, capital discipline, and risk pricing. So investors compare form, not function. By PRI logic and financial logic, ESG integration means ESG factors affect decisions. Disclosure is evidence of that effect. Malaysia mandates the evidence but not the cause. It is logically inverted. If nothing changes, the system will produce more reports, thicker sustainability sections, higher compliance costs, minimal behavioral change, growing ESG cynicism, and eventually ESG will be seen as regulatory theater, not financial intelligence. In conclusion, a disclosure-only ESG regime presumes implementation. When implementation is not required, disclosure collapses into narrative. This is not provocative. This is logically airtight. This is the end of today's video recording. I am Alicia Tay, the founder of ESG Integration in Organization. James Clifford started it, Alicia finishes it. It takes too long to even talk about the logic of ESG reporting. The next video we will talk about the logic of ESG ratings. Stay tuned. See you in the next video.